Hi, everyone, and welcome to AI with Ash. I'm so excited to introduce my first installment of this video podcast dedicated to understanding the philosophy of what's going on right now in the AI space. I'm your host, Ashmini Pereira, and I work as a tech consultant in AI. And I've always been really passionate about philosophy and just like this idea that AI has a lot of ethical dilemmas, and I want to unpack some of those. So, welcome to my podcast. New episodes every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And with that, let's jump right into today's topic, which is very near and dear to my heart, but AI and the infringement on creative rights. And this really struck a chord for me because I work in a corporate environment, but I also do a lot of writing on the side, and it's always been something that empowers me and gets me going. And although I don't do it by trade, I really value those who do. I value creativity, originality, the arts. These things are the glue of our society. This is what allows me to watch great shows and see new original content. This is what allows me to learn how to be a better writer. So I'm walking into my corporate office one day when I notice that there are a group of people striking outside. As I take a closer look, I realize that this is the Writers Guild of America striking outside of my office. It wasn't my company in particular, but it was like they were striking the editors who also worked at in the building. And I was here in like kind of a fork in the road, both as a person who works in AI, but B, as a writer. So I'm deciding what path do I choose. It seems like on one hand, it's do I stand with the writers and ban AI generated content altogether to save creativity and the livelihood of the middle class, or do I hop on the rocket ship of AI automation without any hindrances or guardrails for the promise of the quote-unquote meritocracy and reduced work? Because who doesn't like less work? So as I'm kind of like debating these things and right here like on the edge, I decide to go talk to the people in the Writers Guild. And this was my first time hearing it from the other side as someone who from people whose livelihood depends on their job, their income. So if you look on their website as well, you can see a lot of these testimonials, but a lot of talking about how large film groups have kind of nefariously and slowly cut down team sizes and work hours. And so they've really the union has made a strong list of demands, requiring more documentation and contracts and all of that stuff. But there was a major question of how AI generated content was going to contribute to this field, which has already been difficult. How are we now how are we going to deal with the possible replacement of human writers, the job losses, and the possible devaluation of the craft? And, it's not necessarily the Stephen Kings and the Colleen Hoovers of the world that will be affected. They're loaded. They've made their buck. But it's the livelihood of the middle class that's most impacted when we think about writers who depend on that and have studied that, have dedicated their lives to do it. It's not just a hobby for them. It's their life. So it was definitely quite a melancholy sentiment around and talking to everyone, especially when you hear it from families of writers, and it's difficult because the craft is something that was already difficult in the first place. It's a very high risk, low reward kind of thing, but people do it, people try and make it, and now the competition has severely shifted as machines enter it. And with that, I want to shift into the art world and share another anecdote. I lived in Chelsea and I was gallery hopping, and as I appeared in one of these galleries, I was absolutely amazed at how much intrinsic human sentiment was at this particular gallery. This artist had represented loves of his lives, his muses, in this very abstract way, kind of this amalgamation of different aspects of his life that were so beautiful and special to him. And that's what kind of created what I like to call the quote unquote love factor in the art world. But art is already something that is a very fraud prone market. If anyone's seen White Collar or have heard about like the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heists, like art heists are quite common. There's so many like fakes out there, and the hunt for real art. And this is especially scary when it comes to digital art. And art that's so available on e-commerce sites or on social media that have been web scraped without the proper protocols and the proper consent received, now fed into models like Midjourney and DALL-E, and so are being repurposed by someone who, they couldn't give a rat's ass about the sentiment of a piece of art. So it's really impacted a lot of the livelihood of artists who have spent a lot of time just laboring over the sentiment of their art, only to see it be repurposed by someone with zero skill and zero connection. And yeah, that's kind of what's going on in the art world. A lot of lawsuits there, and we're gonna rebrand. We're gonna retrack our steps there. But let's move on to music, and kind of looking at music with all the new generators. You can have Drake singing a Lana Del Rey song. There's music generators for like text to beat. You can say, oh, I want like an uplifting song with like this kind of beat, and you can generate that. That is just mind-boggling to me because, okay, writing seems like an easy aspect for an LLM. It's about concatenating strings together, seeing the probability of what's next by assigning meaning, and taking a lot of text, understanding it. It seems quite easy. Text is a rather simple medium. Text to text, that makes sense. Text to image requires massive advancements in computer vision and a lot of art fed into it, but still we've done a lot in that space. But sound, like the ability to turn your voice into a data set, or to turn someone's beat, a pattern of beats, into a mathematical formula and feed into a model. And I think that raises a lot of concerns, and the music industry has already taken a massive hit in terms of the traditional distribution model of music, and how that shifted when we think about BitTorrent in 2009. This massive shift in internet sharing protocols. Now it's peer-to-peer, and people can share and download music freely. Now we have copyright infringement, but we solved that with Spotify. But with AI-generated music, what's next? How do you preserve your artistry? And how do you kind of control for what is good music and what's original music? So I think that's the trickiest field with music AI, because it's such a difficult aspect to walk technically, but also ethically. It's such a world of its own. And then finally, I'm going to end it off with how AI impacts acting. Again, this is just another leap ahead. This is combining sound, human emotion, human acting, voice, I said sound, but computer vision, all of these things into one aspect. And I actually created a short film using Runway ML, and I was able to create text to video using prompts to get B-roll of maybe like the West Village on a rainy day. But I also was able to feed in 15 images of my face and generate videos of myself. Granted, they weren't like the most appealing videos. They were quite odd and distorted, but nonetheless, this was an image that kind of looked like me. And we saw this in the season premiere of season 6 of Black Mirror, with Salma Hayek's character in the season premiere given away her creative rights, only to be used quite inappropriately and have these unintended consequences for Hayek's public image. Crazy stuff. So it's like, where do these creative rights end? What can you use them for? And celebrities are quite at an interesting point, because I think celebrities are who we have the most data on, and their data sets are usually those that are fed into these LLMs. So it's gonna be an interesting thing, I think, for a lot of celebrities to deal with. So I think for the first time I feel a little feel a little bad for them. And I want to finally end this off with the note that there's many other avenues of creativity that AI impacts beyond just music, acting, arts, and writing. There's game design and animation and many other avenues. But I hope that these pillars are a good representation of what's happening. And now we can kind of unpack everything that's going on here. So I have a blog post about the technical nuances of LLMs and how the data is fed, but kind of to summarize it, we're talking about a large corpus of information fed into a large language model. And this corpus of information can come from a restricted data set, it can come from web scraping. When we see Bing's AI search engine, that is something that is quite up to date versus ChatGPT, which stops at September 2021 in terms of its data, but sometimes makes question, like, it knows like the Queen of England died, which happened after September 2021. So kind of interesting aspect there that these different LLMs have different data sets, and so there's so many like options of models and text to image, image to image, video to video, so many things coming out now that the technical nuances of each LLM are very different. But essentially this is data fed and data out, just a rearrangement of said data. You could maybe combine Da Vinci with Picasso, but Da Vinci and Picasso are deceased. What about if you combine two modern artists? If you combined a Koons and, I don't know much about modern art. If you combine a Koons and a Koons, then you're getting two Koons, and that's not fair to Jeff Koons. So, it's like, oh, that wasn't a good example, but I'm trying to make just read my freaking article on the technical nuances of an LLM, and maybe I'll make a separate video on that. But I guess now we can move into the topic of what's actually going on. And this is an ethical dilemma of property. That is my property. That data that you fed into your large language model, that picture, that recording of my voice, XYZ, anything you feed into a large language model is your quote unquote property. So when we think about maybe the king of the property philosophy, John Locke, he would say that the social contract is required to create a way to limit the unauthorized use of artists' work and the reproduction of their work, and specifically, and ensure a fair compensation for artists and writers such that they can survive in an AI society. So I personally really agree with Locke on what he thinks about this, because this is honestly just an intellectual property issue. But the thing about intellectual property is that it's intellectual and it's not something that's really something you can see, that's tangible. So that's what makes a lot of these AI plagiarism and AI data rights cases so difficult, is because this, and I'll get into that later, but this need to prove human ownership. Yeah, it's a crazy world out there, man. But anyway, now that we've talked a little bit about the the philosophy of property, let's talk about the philosophy of creativity. So if we're talking about what is creative, what is original, Kant, little Mr. Immanuel Kant in the Critique of Judgment, talks a lot about how fine art is genius because fine art is original. Genius is originality. So if an AI generates outputs based on a wealth of data from humans who have worked long hours to produce said data, then nothing the AI creates is original. Therefore, it's not genius. In addition, Kant would talk a lot about like human experience and what it means to be aesthetic. And if you can evoke a human reaction, that is soul, that is creativity. So that is two very contradictory statements when we think about AI and creativity. So kind of to backtrack, our one aspect is that genius is original because there's no definite rule. AI fails this because AI adheres to algorithms and models, which are inherently rules. 2, it must be original, that it is not derived from imitation, but it can be imitated. So an AI output can obviously be imitated, but it in itself is an imitation of something else. It is not original. The third thing is that it cannot indicate scientifically how it brings about its product, but rather gives the rule as nature. This is not a natural law. This is quite literally in its statement an artificial law. So by those 3 points, AI is unoriginal. As for the human reaction that could possibly give it soul, that is odd, I think, because I think this human reaction is just a reaction to an imitated piece of work. So that in itself is a full response to something that's unoriginal. So I think I might have just found a good contradiction in Kant's little statement here. I'm gonna have to return to that. Anyway, so now that we've talked a little bit about algorithms and creativity and property rights, let's get into what's happened so far. So let's talk about the Senate hearing on OpenAI that happened, I think, I don't know, like a month or two ago. But it was from the Subcommittee on Privacy, Technology, and Law, and it was called The Oversight of AI, Rules for Artificial Intelligence. And it's like a 3-hour hearing. You can find it online and listen to it. But it's essentially Sam Altman urging to be regulated, which I think is like such a novel thing to happen, that a CEO of a company would ask the government to regulate said company. I don't think that's ever been done before. And I think that is just a genie out of a bottle scenario within AI. That is probably the scariest thing, that we've built something that we cannot contain. And at its current moment, it's being misused. That is eventually the worst case scenario. And it's something that, regardless of copyright laws, regardless of anything, if this thing goes haywire, then none of said laws matter. But let's talk about the laws that already exist. So the U.S. Copyright Office created what's called the Human Authorship Requirement. And this registers an original work of authorship, provided that the work was created by a human being. The copyright law only protects the fruits of intellectual labor that are founded in the creative powers of the mind. And then brings up a couple of trademark cases. Yeah, so it's interesting how we talk about what is creative and what is human. How do you prove something is human in a world where AI uses human work? So it's definitely going to be an uphill battle, I think, for the humans in proving something that's based in an algorithm that is black boxed. How do you prove something that you can't see? Or if you're not technically gifted, that you can't even understand. So that is a major issue. And I think I also want to mention my final legal case is something that happened way, way, way back, but it's actually a good precedent for what's happening right now, and that is Warhol v. What's this person? Warhol v. Goldsmith. And essentially there's this painting that Warhol had, and it includes a photograph of Prince in it. The photograph was taken by Goldsmith, and without her consent, he used the photograph within a painting of his. So it's still his painting. He just used something of hers. And so he actually sued her first. I don't know why he did that. It was just like a preemptive thing. But he then used fair use as the legal doctrine in copyright law, which promotes freedom of expression by permitting the unlicensed use of copyright-protected works in certain circumstances, according to a description from the U.S. Copyright Office. There are 4 factors that the courts use when determining fair use. 1, the purpose and character of the use, i.e. commercial or educational. 2, the nature of copyrighted work. A news article is more likely to be subject to fair use than a creative work like a movie or a song. 3, the amount and substantiality of the portion of the work used. And 4, the effect of the use on the market or value of the copyrighted work. I don't know how Warhol got this going, but I guess he didn't. It was the Warhol Foundation that did it. But I thought this was an interesting case in that it applies of, okay, so what if we personify an AI and we're saying that, okay, if they use a snippet of an artist's work, that applies for the fair use legal doctrine. So here, depending on how we view the materialism of AI, these two, the fair use legal doctrine and the human authorship legal doctrine, are two things that I think work against each other. So if I was a lawyer, which I'm not, I would probably look into that Supreme Court. That's what I think about it. Anyway, let's end off with just like my thoughts and some final remarks, because this is a topic that I could take quite some time to talk about. It is dense, and I've already diluted it, and I'm afraid that diluting it more is gonna leave out some important things, but I do my best, and that's all I can do. So okay, let's return to the question of the materialism of AI, right? So when I say that, I'm saying, do we just see AI as a clunky machine just made of semiconductor chips and it's just like a machine, it's just a thing? Or do we see it as something a little immaterial, something that is a thinking thing, as Descartes would say? If it can pass tests, if it can, produce original proteins in AlphaFold, you can watch my last video on the ethics of ChatGPT to learn more about that reference. How is it that this AI is just a clunky machine comparable to a calculator? It has super intelligent properties. I mean, for God's sakes, it's smarter than me and you. But it's just like, can we really reduce this concept of AI just to a bunch of chips and metal? I don't think so. And I think as we look at that, and especially humans who use AI, how they'll be punished, because if it's not regulated in the first place, and you can't, it's just this complete floodgate of a lot of people's work and a lot of people using other people's work. So it's just massive plagiarism case. And this is coming from someone, I had a plagiarism case in college, and I can talk about that one day, but I know how serious of an issue plagiarism is, don't get me wrong. But it's just a lot to consider when we think about the breadth of what has already happened, how we're going to move forward from this, because I don't know if there's any point in trying to undo what's been done, because the floodgates have opened. But what can we do in the future to make sure that never happens again? How can artists learn how to protect their data? When I say artists, let me just push this out into everyone. Writers, musicians, actors, all of them. How do they know how to protect their data rights? What are the creative rights going to look like in the future? And how are we as a collective society going to agree on how we view AI? These are important questions. I hope people are thinking about it. And next, I want to touch on what I personally think is going to happen with the quote-unquote valuation of the craft. There's a lot of fear that, if I can generate a paragraph, why would I need a writer to do it? Clearly devalues the craft. That's a given, and it's going to potentially put a lot of people out of a job. But does it really devalue human sentiment? I mean, I'm an optimist. I'm not sanguine, but I'm definitely an optimist, and I think that we might see a surge in quote-unquote craft valuation moving forward, because, I hope that there's a possibility that the masses value reality more than the simulated experience of art. I think I'm hopeful that there will be a surge in such things, because you can't automate this soul. You can't automate art. So, yeah, I have faith in humanity, and I'm optimistic about the valuation, but it is a strange predicament for a lot of these creative professions, which have already been competitive, as I mentioned earlier, and with super intelligent machines just entering the competition, it's just this massive need to upskill that a lot of people, I mean, how do you keep up with a machine? That's just like the difficulty. I keep seeing on the news, like, people need to upskill. We need more people who know about XYZ. Okay, like, we wouldn't need that if a machine just shut up. Like, that's what I think about it. And I think the best quote I found on this was from an article. I don't know, I think it was like the Art Review or something. I'll put all my citations and stuff in the show notes, but here it is. For digital artists, this technology represents lost jobs and stolen labor. I've worked on developing my skills my whole life, and they just took it and made it to zeros and ones. Illustration rates haven't kept up with inflation since the literal 1930s. They've stagnated and in some cases shrunk since the 80s. So, we've already seen that for these professions that have already had stagnation but are so instrumental to the soul of society, that there's this major disdain for what's happening in AI and how that's already impacting. It's kind of like beating someone while they're already down is what AI is doing. So, yeah. I guess I want to end off on the fact that I am quite empathetic for those who are anxious about this technology, and I think it makes me anxious as well. And for those who it has already affected, whether you've noticed it or not. And I hope these early sentiments will prove as guidance for those who want to create this guardrails for technology, guardrails that prevent the economic harm, specifically of the middle class. And I know, yes, I created a video using AI-generated work. Does that make me a massive hypocrite? That I actively use the thing I seek to destroy as I tear apart AI to ethical pieces in this podcast. But the way I see it and the way I sleep at night is that it wasn't AI that made my piece a good piece. It was the way I used AI. And that's what we're hearing every day. It feels like it's like, oh, AI won't replace you. Humans that use AI will. Okay, I don't really know what that means, but I mean, I guess I just explained it. Like, the way I used AI was creative. So, I guess, I don't know. Sometimes I don't know. And maybe you, the cynic who thinks I am just full of BS, can wonder how impure my intentions are if I made this video, but also made that video. But I think this confusion is where a lot of us exist. It's like, okay, well, I just want to follow the stream of tech adoption because that's what I need to survive in the current economic climate. But I also have a moral compass, and I want to weigh the ethics and risks of it because that's just how I'm wired, because I'm a human being. So that's life, and that's hard. And I hope you enjoyed listening, and I hope you have a lot to think about. So yeah, thank you for listening. Comment below with what you thought of the video, and I look forward to chatting soon. And yeah, make sure to smash that subscribe button, follow. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Bye.